Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. With the month of horrors just around the corner, one may be inclined to fear witches, werewolves, phantoms, and other strange and morbid things of the dark. But there is one more thing left to fear above all else and is usually overlooked: yourself. So, lock your doors and dim your lights. It's time we track down our next terrorific tale. Dog Will Hunt.
You'll have to excuse me if it takes me a moment to gain my composure. I haven't been able to stop vomiting. Or, rather, I've only recently regained control of my insides. For the time being, anyway. I'm sitting here writing this because I guess I'm still having a really difficult time wrapping my head around what's happened to me. And I feel as though this may help me to understand. 3 days ago, I was a family man. I owned a nice home on the outskirts of a respectable suburb. I was a proud husband to a beautiful woman, and father to a newborn baby girl. Just the thought begins to sicken me, but I'll do my best to ignore my quivering gut and recall the events that led me to where I am now. My wife and I would frequent a local park with our new baby, nestled inside of her purple stroller. The days had grown warmer, and I found myself more involved in community activities, namely, the neighborhood watch. No one really thinks of the neighborhood watch to be a terribly dangerous activity, and with nothing more than a few sightings of a late-night miscreant in the park, accompanied by the contents of trash bins to be found littering the ground subsequent mornings, I didn't think too much of it either. We only live right down the road from the park, surrounded by two now vacant homes, an elderly couple and an elderly woman. Living alone in a home must have seemed really lonely, considering its size and single occupant. The great thing about this place was the quiet nature of this particular part of the neighborhood, but I also felt a nagging responsibility to watch over my frailer neighbors, and began checking the park after close on occasion. I work a lot of long hours, and living with a newborn, I obviously hadn't gotten around to any real investigative work, nor did I think it all that pertinent. That wasn't until the McGregors, the elderly couple across the street, had their home broken into while on vacation. What bothered me the most is that they left the lights on and a car parked in the driveway to make it look as though they were indeed at home. Whoever had broken in hadn't stolen anything of value, only trashed the living room and the master bedroom as if looking for something specific, and then left, not caring whether or not someone had been home. At least, that's how it appeared. My wife and I had a late-night discussion after the event, and she was the one who actually pushed me to keep a closer eye on the streets at night, while she would prioritize the baby. I think the whole thing really shook her up and made her fearful that we could have a similar experience. I was concerned as well, just not as much as she. I should have been. I made it a routine from that point on to sit and watch the happenings outside from the comfort of my porch. I would only sit out there for about a half an hour, listening to the sounds of distant traffic and nearby insects. That proved to be more than enough time one night, when I saw a large, hunched-over human being moving in the distance at the park, just on the rim of light created by the nearby street lamps. I knew it to be way after curfew for the park, so I stood to my feet and shined the flashlight in my hand in the man's direction. Granted, The beam of illumination emanating from my handheld mag light was far too weak to breach the distance between us and shed light on the features of the man. But I did expect my notable, sudden attention to him and recognition of his presence to cause him to at least move, maybe attempt avoiding detection anyway. I was wrong. The man actually stopped. I couldn't see his face or his eyes, but I could almost feel them glaring at me, sizing me up like a bucket of chicken. "Hey!" I yelled out. It took a step back, nearly out of sight completely, but stopped and stood motionless once again. I held the flashlight before me and walked towards him, hoping he would finally just scamper off. Looking back, I know I should have alerted my wife to inform the local police, but it occurred to me that if I could just get close enough, I could land sight on this man's features and gain an accurate description, one that would facilitate his arrest and regain the safe feeling this little cul-de-sac once had. Just a little closer. It wasn't like I had to get all that close. I was now in the park and could see the hulking mass at the edge of the tree line past the overhead lamp and directly in front of me. Again, specific details still eluded me, but something seemed wrong. His shape was wrong. His shoulders far too large, especially with the support of such a small waist, and his arms. They had to be its arms, hung down way too low to be natural. I stopped where I stood, now realizing that whatever this thing was, it had lured me here. I was its prey. It was when I heard a bellowing growl that I began walking backwards, ever so slowly. What stood before me could not have been a man, for no human could have made that sound. My backpedaling quickly turned into a sprint once I had decided to turn myself around and face my house. My only thoughts were of my family and getting to a phone. I took only a few strides when I heard the thump of running steps behind me. They were far too awkward to be a human stride and much faster than mine. It was when I felt a sharp pain on my neck that I blacked out. I awoke on a stretcher. A pale, shining white paint and clear tubing emphasized themselves as I opened my eyes. A man sat beside me, dressed in white, asking me all kinds of questions that I found myself too weak to answer. I awoke the second time in the hospital. This time, I was much more alert. In fact, I was feeling better than I had in years. I was told by my doctor, who stood alongside a policeman, and my wife, that I had been attacked. That my wife had heard a loud commotion in the park and noticed my absence. That if the police hadn't shown up when they did, that I likely would have been dead. The cops apparently thought their presence had scared the perpetrator off. The dire nature of my wounds, however, encouraged him to inform me of the miraculous nature of how fast I had healed from them. When I had been found, my neck was said to have been nearly torn down to the jugular, and now, overnight, I was nearly well enough to return home. The doctor insisted that I remain for observation, but I assured him I felt great and I wanted to leave. That's when the cop stopped me and told me he wanted to ask me a few things first. Primarily, if I had gotten a look at the guy who had attacked me. I really couldn't. I would have told him what I did see, but I thought he would think me mad. So, I told him I only remembered a large man roaming around in the park and chasing me back to my house. Eventually, after talking with both my wife and I some more, he decided he had enough and asked me to call him if I remembered anything else, giving me his business card. The doctor then asked me to rest, but I held firm on leaving, and that's what I did. That evening, my wife's sister came to drop off the baby before asking me if I was okay, talking a little with my wife, and leaving for home. I was so happy to see my little girl, beautiful blonde locks and dressed in her pink daddy's girl onesie. I played with my wrinkly newborn baby girl, loving brown eyes, staring at me with wonder, while my wife cooked dinner for us. There was a high police presence that night, so we didn't find ourselves too concerned, both concluding, with a humorous tort, that I shouldn't be needed and that there was no need for me to sit on the porch. We laughed a little about it all, putting the baby down after a little post-dinner television, and slipped off to our bedroom. We made passionate love that night, my wife happy, I think, just to have me in her arms, holding her tightly back. We lay in bed for about 2 hours, staring out the window at the increasing moonlight, talking to each other as we drifted off to sleep. The next thing I remember, I woke up in a terrible pain, a pain coming from my entire inside. Inside my fingers, inside my legs, every part of me felt on fire and somehow painfully swollen and ever swelling. I clutched at my skull, the roof of my mouth feeling pushed and full of pressure, as if my face was going to explode. The first shout had awakened my beloved wife, but it was the second that got the baby screaming, coming from down the hall. My wife jumped out of bed and rushed to my side as I collapsed to my knees, and then onto my hands. She was asking me what was wrong, screaming it, but I could only scream myself until, through the agony and wincing, I heard a familiar sound. My scream slowly turned into a growl, an inhuman, bellowing growl. It felt as though all my bones popped out of socket all at once. That was it. A blink of an eye. It didn't feel like I slept. It wasn't like sleeping and not dreaming. Even when you don't remember your dream, one can usually tell that they had slept. No, this was more like the blink of an eye. In the blink, I had gone from absolute pain to absolute terror. My mind tried desperately to reel itself back, deny what it was perceiving. I was in the baby's room. The room was not how it had been left at all. The walls were gouged and broken, the bassinet tipped over and nearly smashed in two. The blood. There was so much blood. It was everywhere. I saw my wife out of the corner of my eye, propped against the wall, large lacerations all about her face, chest, and limbs, her heart seemingly torn from her chest. I stood to my feet, hoping to search the room and possibly find my little girl. That's when I noticed something hanging from my face, partially covering my mouth. I grabbed a hold of it and instantly recognized it as a piece of wet fabric. When I pulled it, I felt a tugging from between the teeth it had been stuck between, causing it to dangle from my face. It's when I looked at it and realized what it was that I ran into the bathroom and began vomiting up large, red, soft chunks of flesh and stained, curly locks. The bloody, pink fabric that had been caught between my teeth belonged to the onesie my daughter had been wearing.
Well, if that doesn't make you hungry, I don't know what will. Though, I wonder how much indigestion a baby would cause. I guess it's time we find out. But, you find yourself hungry for more as well, make sure to stop by again next weekend. And as always, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so we can catch you all again next Saturday.